The frost cracked under his boots like tiny bones. Each step was a violation of the morning's brittle silence. The air was a blade, sharp and clean, scented with old hay and the ghost of wood smoke. And beneath it all, the smell he'd come to know too well, the sour metallic tang of neglect. The wind whistled a low, lonely tune through the gaps in the stable walls, a sound that was less a noise and more a feeling of emptiness. This was the place things were forgotten. He came here because he had to, because the silence in his own house had grown too loud. It was a different kind of quiet, one filled with the echo of a phone that wouldn't ring, of a laugh that had been extinguished. His sister had loved this place once, had talked of nothing else. Now it was just a plot of land with a decaying barn. The last piece of her he didn't know how to let go of. He'd sold the others. The car, the apartment. But this was a wound still open. And then he saw the shape in the far paddock. It was less a horse and more a sculpture of shadows and angles, a sketch done in charcoal and sorrow. It was a Shire foal, or it should have been. All legs but the wrong kind. Not the sturdy, promise-filled pillars of a breed built for strength, but spindles, trembling under a weight it was never meant to carry. Its coat, matted and filthy, was the color of a winter sky just before snow. Its head was too heavy for its neck. Hanging so low its velvet muzzle brushed the frozen dirt. He stood at the fence, his breath pluming in the air, and felt something in his own chest hang just as low. He hadn't known. She hadn't told him. The lawyer's letter had just said property and contents. It hadn't mentioned a living, breathing consequence. The foal didn't look up. Its entire world was the patch of mud between its feet. It was the most profound absence of life he had ever witnessed. It wasn't sleeping. It wasn't resting. It was just existing. Waiting. For what, he couldn't imagine. There was no food in the trough. The water was a solid sheet of gray ice. He didn't decide to move. His feet were carrying him through the gate before the thought had fully formed. The crunch of ice under his weight was a gunshot in the stillness. The foal's head jerked up. Two eyes, dark as old pennies, wide with a terror so ancient it seemed to suck the light from the air. Every muscle on its frail body went taut, a bowstring drawn back for 1,000 years. It tried to back away, but its legs, weak and uncoordinated, tangled. It stumbled, catching itself with a knee that hit the ground with a soft, sickening thud. He froze. His hands, shoved deep in his pockets, were fists. This was a mistake. He was no caretaker. He was a man who broke things by looking at them. He was here to sign papers, to call a scraper, to erase this place from the earth, not to stand in the presence of a creature so broken it mirrored the cracks inside him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He made himself smaller, turning his shoulders away, looking at the ground. A gesture of no threat, a language he wasn't sure he remembered how to speak. He took one step, then another. The foal watched him, its breath coming in short, sharp puffs of vapor. Its ears were pinned flat against its skull, but one of them twitched, a tiny, betraying flicker of curiosity beneath the fear. He was close enough now to see the details he wished he couldn't. The way its ribs pressed against its skin like a ship's wreckage against a tide. The dark line of a dried tear track cutting through the grime on its cheek. The halter, a cheap, frayed thing of nylon, had been left on too long. It had bitten into the flesh around its pole, leaving a ring of raw, angry skin and matted hair. A rusted chain meant to tie it lay discarded in the mud nearby. He stopped an arm's length away. He could smell its fear, a hot, sour odor. He could see the fine tremors running through its body. He didn't reach out. He didn't speak empty comforts. He just stood there, sharing the same frozen air. His own grief felt like a stone in his throat. This was what she had left behind. This was her last secret, a life, dwindling down to nothing in the cold. He didn't know how long they stood like that, two ruins in a quiet field. But slowly, the panicked puffing of its breath began to slow. The tight coil of its body loosened just a fraction. The head, once held in terrified alertness, began to droop again with the exhaustion that was heavier than fear. And then a shift. Almost imperceptible. The foal's nose, dirty and velvety, twitched. It wasn't looking at him, but its head tilted just a degree. It was smelling him, taking him in. He held his breath. The world narrowed to the space between them. With a slowness that felt like the turning of the earth, the foal took a single, hesitant step forward. Its neck stretched out, its nostrils flaring. He could feel the warm, grass-scented puff of its breath on his frozen wrist. It hesitated, then nudged the rough wool of his coat sleeve. Not a demand. Not a nip. A testing. A question. The touch was so light, so tentative, it felt like a whisper against his skin. He didn't move. Didn't dare. The stone in his throat dissolved into something else, something warm and terrifying. This creature, with every reason to fear the world, was choosing for a single fleeting second not to fear him. He finally exhaled, a shuddering breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The sound made the foal flinch, snatching its head back the moment broken. It retreated 2 steps, its wary eyes back on him, the fragile trust shattered. He turned to go, his heart a dull, aching thing in his chest. The paperwork was in the car. The number for the auction house was in his phone. This was too much. This was a pain he hadn't signed up for. But as he walked away, his boots making that same awful crunch in the silence, he heard it, a soft shuffling sound behind him. He stopped. He didn't want to look. He knew what he would see. He turned. And there it was, the foal, standing at the edge of its world of mud, its head lifted just slightly, watching him go. It took one uncertain step. Then another. Not running. Not charging. Just following. Its eyes were no longer just afraid. They were lonely, and in that look he saw his own reflection. The days bled into weeks, a slow gray procession. He came every morning. He'd fixed the fence, mended the stable door, hung a heat lamp that cast a weak orange glow in the perpetual chill. He brought sweet hay and warm mashes, and the foal, who he'd started calling Atlas for the impossible weight he seemed to carry, began to lose the sharp, hungry angles. His coat, once the color of despair, began to show patches of dappled gray like sunlight trying to break through storm clouds. But the chain remained. Not the physical one, rusted and discarded in the mud. He'd thrown that thing into the woods. This was a different chain. It was in the way Atlas would still startle at a bird taking flight, his body freezing for a split second before he remembered he was safe. It was in the way he'd eat, always keeping one wary eye on the gate as if expecting the good food to be taken away. It was in the deep, silent well of his eyes that still held a history Eli couldn't read. Their bond was a fragile, wordless thing. Built on quiet presence, Eli would sit on an upturned bucket, sipping bitter coffee, and Atlas would stand a few feet away, his breath slowly sinking with the rhythm of the man's own. He'd allow himself to be brushed, the stiff bristles moving over his thickening coat, but he would still flinch if Eli's hand moved too quickly towards his head, towards the faded scar the halter had left behind. The real mystery, the one that gnawed at Eli, was his sister, this careful, meticulous woman, the one who labeled her spice jars and color-coded her books. How could she have let this happen? The question was a cold stone in his gut. It didn't fit the person he knew. It felt like a betrayal of her memory, and that guilt was its own kind of chain. Then came the rain. A cold, relentless downpour that turned the paddock to soup and hammered on the tin roof like a frantic heartbeat. Eli was in the stable, forking clean straw into Atlas's stall when his boot hit something solid buried beneath the old damp bedding. He knelt, his fingers digging into the chill dampness, and pulled it free. It was a book, a leather-bound journal warped and stained from moisture, its pages stuck together. His sister's name was embossed on the cover in faded gold letters. His own heart hammered now, matching the rhythm on the roof. This was hers. Her private thoughts. The truth of what happened here. He shouldn't. It felt like a violation. But the sight of Atlas standing quietly in the corner of his clean stall watching the rain tipped the scales. He needed to know. He carried the journal to his bucket under the heat lamp, its glow suddenly feeling like a spotlight on his guilt. The pages were a battle. They tore as he tried to separate them. Words bled into each other, paragraphs lost to water stains. But then a date. From the previous autumn, his eyes found a legible passage. The vet was here again. Poor Bramble. My big, beautiful boy. He went down so fast. The laminitis is too severe. He was in so much pain. I had to make the call. I held his head and told him what a good man he was until the very end. I've never felt so alone. Bramble, her beloved Shire gelding. Eli remembered her phone calls then, her voice thick with a worry he'd been too busy to fully hear. He kept reading, turning the fragile pages with trembling hands. I can't believe it. Bramble's baby. He's here. A little colt. He looks just like his father. Same dapples, same kind eye. He's all I have left of him. I've named him Atlas, because he will carry Bramble's legacy forward. My little Titan. The air left Eli's lungs. Atlas wasn't neglected. He was loved. He was the last piece of a beloved animal she had lost. He frantically turned more pages, the story unfolding in heartbreaking fragments. The fever won't break. It came on so suddenly. The vet says it's a virus, that it's hit the farm hard. I can barely stand. My own body is failing me. But Atlas, he needs me. I have to get to the barn. I have to— The entry stopped mid-sentence. The next page was blank. Then another. Then nothing. Eli looked up from the book, his vision blurring. The pieces crashed together. The full, devastating picture finally clear. She hadn't abandoned Atlas. She had gotten sick. The same virus that was going around. She must have been too ill to move, to call for help. She had been fighting her own body, trapped in the house, while just yards away the foal she loved was waiting for her. Alone. Confused. Hungry. She hadn't been neglectful. She had been overcome. She had died. Alone in that house, probably thinking of this foal. Her last connection to the horse she adored. A sob broke from him. A raw, ragged sound that was torn from a place he'd kept locked tight. It wasn't just sadness. It was shame. Shame for every uncharitable thought he'd had about her. Shame for his own absence in her final days. The grief he had carried, cold and stony, finally melted, and what poured out was a torrent of anguish and regret. He curled over the journal, his shoulders shaking, weeping for his sister, for her loneliness, for her love that had ended in such quiet, terrible tragedy. He wept for the phone calls he hadn't returned, for the business that had always seemed more important. He wept until there was nothing left. He didn't know how long he sat there hollowed out, but eventually he became aware of a new sound beneath the drumming rain, a soft rhythmic breathing right beside his ear, a warmth against his side. He slowly lifted his head. Atlas was there. He had left his corner, he had walked across the stall, and now he stood pressed against Eli's side, his head lowered, his soft whiskered muzzle just inches from Eli's cheek. He was breathing slowly, deeply, his warm breath fogging in the damp air. His large dark eye was fixed on Eli, not with fear or curiosity, but with a profound ancient knowing. He didn't nudge. He didn't whinny. He simply stood, a solid, warm, living wall against the storm. He held the space for Eli's breaking, and he did not move. The storm inside Eli quieted. The sobs subsided into shaky breaths. He leaned his head against the foal's strong neck, feeling the steady, reliable beat of his heart. In that moment, the chain wasn't just off Atlas, it was off of him too. The foal hadn't been a burden she left behind. He was her final gift, a living, breathing vessel for her love, waiting here for Eli to finally arrive and understand. Weeks later, on a morning sharp with the promise of spring, Eli stood at the fence. The paddock was green again. Atlas, now sturdy and bright-eyed, his coat gleaming, nudged at his pocket for a carrot. Eli laughed, a real sound, and gave it to him. As Atlas crunched it contentedly, he turned and ambled away, not toward the hay, but toward the old oak tree in the center of the field. He dropped his head and began to sniff at the base of the trunk, then nudged something with his nose. Curious, Eli walked out to him. There, half hidden in the new grass, was a flat, moss-covered stone. It wasn't a natural rock. It was too smooth. Using the toe of his boot, he pushed aside the grass. Someone had carved letters into it. Bramble, a good man, my heart, his sister's hand. She must have placed it here after she buried him. A private memorial for a private love. Atlas lowered his head and blew softly on the stone, his breath stirring the moss. He knew. In some deep, quiet way that horses have, he knew this was a place of importance, a place of love. Eli placed his hand on the foal's withers, feeling the immense strength there, the legacy of the father he never knew. He wasn't just caring for a horse his sister left behind. He was tending a garden of love she had planted. He was learning a language of the heart she had spoken fluently. The grief was still there, but it was no longer a stone. It was this: the warmth of the sun, the sound of contented chewing, the solid, trusting presence at his side. Sometimes the ones who carry you out of the darkness are the ones you never saw coming. And sometimes healing doesn't roar. It arrives as quietly as a foal, choosing to stand beside you in the rain and wait for your storm to pass. If this story found a place in your heart, then you know these moments of quiet connection are what truly change us. Please subscribe and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Press the bell icon so you won't miss the next story. The next journey, the next heart that needs to be heard. Thank you for watching.